for joining today. Hopefully this will help more people sort of understand what all of our organisations do and how we might be able to work together on future projects, knowing what our individual capabilities and interests are. So I am from the Seismology Research Centre. I've been working here for 30 years now. It was established in 1976. We are primarily an earthquake observatory. Our code is Oz. We operate a number of sub-networks. This is a screenshot of our data management system that shows the networks that we're running. So I'll give you a bit of a history and an overview of my presentation. So the SRC started in 1976 at Preston Institute of Technology and Phillip Institute of Technology, and it was then taken over by RMIT a bit later. So while we were there, we were when it first started, the Victorian water industry helped to establish the first few stations that we operated, and then that turned into software development and hardware development to run that network. One of the main early projects was the Thomson Dam Reservoir Triggered Seismicity Network, which I'll cover off a little bit later. So these are the sort of main important parts of our history, I guess. The SRC was sold to private industry in 1998, and then a couple of years later, or about a year after that, we took on the Philippines project, which was a big kick for us along in our work, and I'll explain why that is. And then in 2002, we were acquired by ESS Earth Sciences, which is where we sit at the moment. So that's been for 20 years now. So reservoir triggered seismicity, a lot of people probably know what this is already. Obviously, you build a dam and there's a potential for triggering seismicity. And here, that little animation is showing those shallow red earthquakes as the reservoir was filling, and then some years later triggering a nearby fault. So this was the network that was first started by SRC. We put a network of I think at its most, there were maybe around a dozen stations around Thomson. So it was a fairly intense little network, and gave us a good data set to be able to do this sort of thing. So it's very much a formative part of where we came from. So back in the old days, obviously a lot of data was collected manually by traveling around. Thomson actually used drum recorders. That's a photo of when it was being used up in Tennant Creek. There's a record of Tennant Creek with all those earthquakes. And that's how we would initially analysing our data, was by looking at those smoke paper records and picking times. Eventually, we moved on to an earthquake alerting service. We used to carry pages around and get messages that looked like that, which sort of very hard to decode. And then we went to phones, and it was similarly hard to decode from those little screens. And that prompted us to enter all the data into a program, which was a development of one of our very early programs called EQLocal, which turned into EQFocus, and that's how we would locate earthquakes. We have been developing that software for many years, and the Philippines project was one that really kicked that along as well. So we now have this waveform analysis software called Waves for looking at seismograms and filtering them, etc. And we've recently developed that to actually be able to locate events as well. From those pics using a local model, and we're continuing to develop that. Now that software is now freely available, so if there's any students or researchers that need waveform analysis and earthquake locating magnitude calculation software, that's something that you can use free, and you can it accesses FDSN databases for station information, and you can select all that. So that's one of the things we're quite proud of producing. We have also produced a little app for iPad and iPhone, which we use while we're on duty to be able to locate events by just picking a single P&S from one station and then moving the earthquake around until we work out where it is. It really helps us to get that answer very quickly so that we can respond to the earthquake appropriately. So we also developed hardware early days because they weren't readily available. So our Kalungi program of development was started. So there's a Kalungi D series, that's the 4th generation up in the top left, and the 3rd generation, the original Kalungi Classic, is down there. In front of those, you can see a couple of our current generation Gecko recorders. And that's what enables us to run our network that we've got. So we operate 49 telemated stations in our network. We are monitoring 101 stations, including public data from South Australia, which David Love will talk to a little bit later. University of Melbourne, again, which Abe will talk to you a little bit later. Geoscience Australia's national network and the Australian Seismometers in Schools network as well forms part of those. And of all of those stations, about 62 are running Kalungi recorders. So Philippines, I mentioned, that was one that was an important project for us. We upgraded, this was in 1999, we upgraded the national network of the Philippines to digital and more modern drum recorders. So you can see in the background there, there's those 3 drum recorders, and in the bottom there's 2 digital recorders. And there was 34 stations, and we upgraded there. So it was a big part of a boost to our ability to develop our software for managing that network and for the data analysis. We're still involved in the Philippines a lot. Here's a project installing some strong motion instruments in the dams over there. But we also now provide a lot of strong motion instrumentation for the Philippines for monitoring buildings, because it's a requirement over there. So here's a quick animation from a magnitude 6.1 from a building. The blue dot is the one in the basement, the green in the middle, and the red one is on top of that building. And this is a plot that Santi did, one of my colleagues, to animate the motion of, that's as if you're looking down on the building there to see the difference in the motion of that building during that earthquake. So we've got some really good data from structural monitoring in the Philippines. Every time they have a big earthquake, we get a whole range of great data. We also do earthquake hazard studies as well. So we've got a bunch of different areas that we work in there, so that we develop earthquake recurrence models. We do fault investigations and instrumental site response, so VS30 type surveys to be able to look at subsurface structures. We do site-specific seismic hazard assessments, considering both probabilistic and deterministic methods, and also probabilistic fault displacement hazard analysis, which is what you can see in the bottom left there. So our core staff, Wayne Peck, he's running he's in charge of most of the observatory operations that we do. Dee, who's assisting here today, is working on the geology side of our hazard consulting. Ality does most of the grunt work for our hazard consulting, a very big part of our consulting team. Gary obviously established the SRC back in 1976 and is still involved. Russell also, and the employee number 1 of SRC, and still involved with our operations, all in consulting. And we've got Jake, who is our data analyst and field person, and Santi, who's our instrumentation specialist, who assists me with equipment sales, etc. And there's me. And there's also a number of other people. We've got Greg and Leanne doing software development, and a whole bunch of people at ESS in support for our organisation. So in summary, SRC is, we do earthquake analysis and provide alerts. We deploy instrumentation. We develop this processing software. We develop instrumentation, do the hazard assessments, and do the field services. And that's what we'll be doing into the future as well. We're pretty much a very big part of what we do, and being able to do it under ESS has been, very enabled us to grow all of these areas of business, and it's been quite good for us. It's funded our observatory and allows us to keep doing cool earthquake stuff. So that's my presentation. So thank you very much. And I will hand over to Hugh, who is going to talk about Geoscience Australia. So if you want to unmute yourself and share your screen, go for it.
Hi everyone, I'll just share my screen. So I'm Hugh Glanville, one of the team leads at Geoscience Australia that work in earthquake seismology, and I work in the observatory operations and data section. And I realise there's probably people may have a lot of questions or additional questions. I want to contact us about various subjects, and I've put my contact details in here so I can pass that on to the various groups within the agency. We briefly wanted to cover pretty much the gamut of work we're currently doing, trying to shrink everything we've done and doing into 10 minutes. We found a bit of a struggle, so I halved my slides. So hopefully this covers a lot of what people are interested in. So there's 4 main elements of earthquake seismology at Geoscience Australia. So we've got 4 directors and 4 sections that deal mainly in this space. The first one being field operations and engineering. So the top right image gives you a bit of detail on, say, one of the cabinets from one of our remote stations, the design of that. So they work mainly in the system design, installation, maintenance, and land access space. So they're often the people you may encounter out in the field, or if you're dealing with remote deployments with us, often you're liaising with them on land access and equipment, transit, and emplacement. I work in the observatory operations and data section. And we mainly deal with station metadata management, data QA, and distribution of data, network modeling and network design, as well as legacy data digitization. The third main area, and the area that most people have as a touch point for GA for earthquake seismology, is the National Earthquake Alert Centre. So 24/7 monitoring of significant earthquake warnings and advice to key stakeholders, as well as preparing, publishing and managing the GA earthquake catalogue. And you can see the image in the bottom right-hand corner. That's the ops room where there's someone on staff there 24/7. And then the fourth area that a lot of people have a touch point with is natural hazards and impacts. So providing science advice to the whole seismology value chain, development of the national seismic hazard models, earthquake hazard and impact advice, as well as fundamental research on natural and induced earthquakes. So here's a bit of a slide on the field operations and engineering group. So mainly focused around technological innovations and to deliver the projects for science programs in challenging environments. And you can see some of those challenging environments that SRC helped out with the remote deployment kit in Victoria on the right-hand side, and also one of the stations in the Beetaloo there in the middle. So they work a lot on sites, survey and design, infrastructure design, fabrication and management, land access and engagement, which is becoming a larger and larger portion of our work. Rapid deployment kits for aftershock monitoring that are a constantly evolving type of instrumentation in terms of improving design for less failure or updating for new equipment as it comes into play. And then also support for regional program following large natural hazard events. A good recent example is the volcanic eruption in Tonga and the associated tsunami that we've then supplied equipment to Tonga for. As most people are aware, we also operate the Australian National Seismograph Network, which has over 100 independent high-quality seismic stations within Australia and internationally, which has been supplemented in recent years from additions from GSWA, among others. And this is a fundamental baseline data set for both monitoring, alerting and research, as well as long-term monitoring. Some of these stations, as you may know, say Riverview, for example, is still operating over 100 years later. But a lot of the main network has been on since the 1950s. We also operate and maintain CTBTO monitoring sites within Australia and its territories, and support international network operators that operate within Australia. So IRIS, IDA, so the operators of the global seismograph network, that there are a few stations in Australia and our territories. The USGS, again, has a few stations in Australia. Tonga, supporting their re-establishment of their network, and then also providing support to Port Moresby and Rabaul geophysical observatories. And we also collaborate with some of our colleagues here today with state and university-based network operators, GSWA, Uni Queensland, ANU, etc. One of the more modern things we've been doing in recent years is monitoring network performance and daily QA/QC using probability density noise plots for data quality assurance. So these update daily. A few days into the past, you can now do this on the web through IRIS and look at the state of health of the stations on certain days and weeks and track the performance of those stations over time. We also have state of health monitoring to maintain high data availability. A lot of our sites have state of health boxes that monitor voltage, comm strength, have remote relays in them so we can trigger power cycles remotely when things go offline, and watchdog timers when comms go down that try to re-establish comms by resetting modems, etc. We also do some network detection threshold modeling to guide network design to meet stakeholder requirements. And there's a bit of an example down in the bottom right-hand side there with the Beetaloo network in terms of the detectable magnitude thresholds with the network off and on from the national network. So you can see that's around a magnitude 3 or 3.2 over the Beetaloo area before the network went on, then down to around a magnitude 1.8 once the network was in place. Additionally, we deliver all our data near real time and freely available to all stakeholders, to warning centres. So the NEACS, National Earthquake Alert Centre here in Australia, the Pacific Tsunami Warning Centre, GNS in New Zealand, the USGS, etc., as well as data centres like IRIS and the CTBTO, and anyone really, research, academia, industry can all access the data in near real time. We also provide some legacy data, digitisation of seismograms, paper seismograms, microfilm and tape, mainly dealing with the legacy data in our holdings. So obviously legacy data holdings in a lot of agencies and groups around Australia and internationally, and we're slowly making our way through what's in a lot of our archives. National Earthquake Alert Centre, for those that aren't familiar, provides 24/7 earthquake monitoring, detection, analysis and alerting. Is cloud-based system. So it's the first cloud-based monitoring center in the world. So they're the first ones to move to cloud-based operations for this purpose, operating through Amazon. Partner with the Bureau of Met, the Bureau, for those that have been listening to the news recently, in the Joint Australian Tsunami Warning Centre. And the Joint Australian Tsunami Warning Centre is part of the Indian Ocean Tsunami Warning Mitigation System, operated in collaboration with DFAT. They provide our warnings to all countries in the Indian Ocean Basin. The products and services they provide are time-critical earthquake information to government and the public via direct bulletins and the website, as well as situational awareness products such as the Shake Map to the right-hand side there, to supplement emergency management decision-making. The website details the latest information we have on published earthquakes, and they also work on earthquake catalogue curation, production and publication. I'll now move into the seismic hazard activity and capabilities. So their main activities are the National Seismic Hazard Assessment, earthquake source characterization, including paleoseismology and neotectonics, collection and analysis of remote sensing data, ground motion analysis, seismic microzonation, external stakeholder reviews and advice, induced seismicity advice, scenario development, and impact assessments. And there's some examples of some of the products they produce and provide to the right-hand side there. Recently, there's been more activity in induced seismicity research and advice conducted by Geoscience Australia. So as Adam mentioned, and most of you would know, it can be triggered from a range of industrial activities, including dams, hydraulic fracturing, and carbon capture and storage. And recently, we've installed a semi-permanent network in Beetaloo Subbasin to assess baseline seismicity, so then we can monitor for any change in that seismicity from gas or gas extraction activities, exploration and extraction activities in that basin. And we've provided various levels of advice to government on induced seismicity, including the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, West Australian Department of Mines and Industry Regulation and Safety, the Northern Territory Department of Industry, Tourism and Trade, and New South Wales Mining, Exploration and Geoscience. As well as this, we do some international programs and advice. So we have an existing program in PNG, including some staff currently over there working on the LAY project. So we've supported and provided the National Seismic Hazard Model update for PNG for the earthquake loading code. We've got projects in installing community seismic monitoring networks in PNG to try and uplift their real-time and freely available data for earthquake monitoring, as well as updating the and advising on earthquake hazard in lay. We provide a lot of this advice through DFAT, and past programs have included international partners in Indonesia and the Philippines. And that's all I've got on my slides for the moment. Hopefully I flew through it quick enough, and I'll pass it over to whoever's next.
All right, thank you very much, Hugh. That was, yeah, obviously there's a lot going on at GA and a lot to cover, and you've managed to get through it pretty quickly. So thank you very much. Next, we have Michelle Salmon from ANU to talk about the activities there. So over to you, Michelle.
I wear many hats at the Australian National University. I run our Australian Seismometers in Schools permanent seismic network. I also run our ANCS seismic equipment pool. I am heavily involved in our temporary arrays. So I do most of the field planning for that these days. And our latest endeavour is AusPass, our seismic data service. So I'm going to talk to you about all of these very briefly. So the first one is the Australian Seismometers in Schools network. Basically, we have 50 instruments in schools across Australia. They're GORUP 60D instruments, and the data is live streamed. We send it to Geoscience Australia and to IRIS. There's also a public seed link available through AusPass. Now, this was a dual purpose program, which I'll talk about in a second, but basically instruments were put in some areas where there was gaps in the national network, and Geoscience Australia actually uses our instruments now for defining earthquakes around Australia, which is great. We run a full outreach program. So if I go to the next one, basically we go into the schools and we talk to students. This is actually on the left-hand side there is me going and talking to the SciScout students, which was a lot of fun outside and jumping around in front of seismometers and screens. So we allow the schools to have a live feed at the actual school. And basically they get to be part of this big experiment. Now, it was a dual purpose. I told you it was a dual purpose. There was the plans to have research come out of that. So we actually have used GORUP 60D instruments. So they are a sensitive instrument, But there was another reason for that, in that because Australia is not that seismically active, to try and keep students engaged, you want to be able to see those distant earthquakes as well nicely. And you can see in the middle there, there is a great picture of what you can see from the Sulawesi earthquake in 2018. Basically, those are all our stations showing up, and you can see nice, clear information in there. Now, we have actually had quite a lot of successes using the seismometers and schools instruments for research. And that includes just recently over COVID, when no one was allowed to go out, there was a noise research on how the hum of the earth had changed with COVID lockdowns, and you could see the changes in Australia quite clearly. But because of that, we actually were able to look at the noise levels within our schools. And you can actually see in the picture on the right-hand side, the noise profiles for 4 different periods. There's a reference which is over most times within the school. So you can see there's a very small area in the middle, little circles, that's in the weekend. But basically what we see is that the noise at the schools is actually relatively low. A lot of the time it's only during school hours that it's particularly noisy. So the data is actually reasonable quality. It's never going to be as good as a Volt, but it's pretty good for often urban schools or town schools that aren't out in the middle of nowhere. Okay. So the next point is that I run the ANZSEA National Facility for Earth Imaging, but only the seismology part of that. I've listed here all of the stuff that we actually have available at times. It goes in and out quite regularly. We have a fairly good array of seismometers, ranging from really high sensitivity, sort of 60-second instruments, through to our nodes, which are 5 Hertz, which is a new facility. That means that we can actually use those actually for rapid deployment. All of our instruments are 3-component. We have ocean bottom instruments. Those are in a bit of dilapidation at the moment because we lost a lot in the ocean, as you do. So we're in the process of getting those sorted out. But our newest instrumentation is actually an IDAS, which uses the fiber optic cables around uses those as seismometers through a lot of trickery. So then on the right-hand side, we have a whole lot of digitizers. We actually create our own digitizers. They're specifically designed to be out there in harsh environments, a long way from anything, and to run for long periods of time. But we also have a set of commercial instruments as well to enable us to have connected data as well. That's something that we're working towards at the moment. There is other equipment available through ANZSEA. I am not in charge of any of that. So there's magnetotelluric and petrophysics. I've spelt that correctly. Petrophysics equipment is available too, but you can find how to get hold of any of this equipment and how to apply for it through the Auscope ANZSEA page. The advice I would give to everyone and anyone who wants to borrow the equipment is it takes time to get everything ready and out the door. So don't think that you can apply and you'll have something next week. Usually it takes between a month and 3 months to get everything organised for people and sent out. We also run temporary arrays at ANU. So we currently have instruments out, and I'm not sure why you might talk about this a little bit too, with the Swan array, and that's 35 broadband stations around the southwest of WA. But our recent pullouts have been around Lake Eyre, where there were 20 short periods and 20 broadbands. Now, all of this data we actually ingest back into from our field program to AusPass. But I'll just talk about in the context of what this seismologist bit used to be, and that we used to look at what was new, what was monitoring, and so one of the things here was that part of the program for the Lake Eyre was to look at the earthquakes around the Northern Territories. So there was a big earthquake in 1941 on the Northern Territory South Australia border in the Simpson Desert, and we actually flew instruments out into there to have a look at that. I'll show you a picture of that in a second, but I thought just in contrast to the big GA stations, this is what ours look like often. They are sort of standalone. They often get chewed, which is why we've developed a pretty reliable fencing mechanism that you can take large volumes of in a car. But this is the picture of the Simpson Desert earthquakes, basically a 6.4 in 1941, and the idea was to look more at what's going on around there, since the closest seismometer was over 250 kilometres away in Oodnadatta. So the idea is to try and understand those earthquakes in the desert. Okay, and my last hat is for AusPass, which is most of these programs are actually AusScope sponsored, but AusPass actually allows us to share all of our data. So we have all our data coming out from past arrays, and you can see in the map there that there were many arrays around Australia. The data probably dates back as far as the mid-90s. I think 1993 might be our earliest data on there. Most of it is data that was at ANU, but we're starting to get data in from other organisations too, because we have the capacity to be able to share that out. This is specifically important with the ANZIA instruments, which are sponsored by AusScope these days, and providing fair data so that other people can replicate and to reuse the data, and it means that we can get a lot more out of the data in the long term. The contact there is actually Robert Pickle, which I've put in. So there is it is an FDSN data centre, and basically it's open to share data with other people. So if you have data that you want to be able to share and don't have the capacity to do it, we can help you with that. So the last bit is my acknowledgements. Basically, this work was enabled by AusScope and the Australian government via the National Collaborative Research Infrastructure Strategy. So a lot of our equipment has been provided by AusScope, but also the ability to go out and get the data has been provided by AusScope. Okay, that's me.
All right, thank you very much, Michelle. I'm sure that there'll be a bit more about AusScope in Tim's presentation, which is being pre-recorded, and I'll play after the break. So next we have Abe from University of Melbourne, Abe Jones.
Rightio, hopefully everyone can see that. So yeah, I'm Abe Jones, Abraham, and I'm part of University of Melbourne's research group that's looking at earthquakes and seismology. We're a pretty small 4-person research group. So there's myself, Janika Atanaika, and then Gary Gibson and Mike Sanderford also remain involved in our project. So I'll just take through the network that we're running, the instruments that we use, and then a little bit about the research that we've been doing. So there's our network that we operate. So it's mainly focused on Southeast Victoria, particularly Gippsland, and it really started in 2012 with that Moe Thorpedale earthquake when we installed some aftershock monitoring sites, and they sort of became semi-permanent sites, and we established quite a few instruments there in around the Strzelecki and Hoddle ranges. Then in 2016-17, we obtained some funding to expand the network, and so we pushed it further south, including these instruments in Wilson's Prom, a couple in islands in Bass Strait, and also extended it further east. And that was all enabled this microseismic network, as we're calling it. So it's sort of a two-scale network, the regional network, and then focused in on this 90-mile beach area. And that's in support of CarbonNet's project. So they're looking at a potential site for carbon sequestration offshore. So about seven kilometres offshore. So as part of that project, we were sort of tasked with providing a bit of monitoring in the region, get a bit of a baseline of seismicity, and try to see what sort of network coverage we can provide in that environment. And we also have a couple of aftershock sites up near Woods Point still. There's a map there of some of the earthquakes that have been located. As you'd expect, most of them are there located around the Strzelecki Hoddle ranges, around the sort of neotectonic features down there, and also you see a lot on the Selwyn Fault. And interestingly, we're getting a few deeper events sort of to the east of the Selwyn block boundary, which is sort of an area of ongoing research for us. Just some stats there of just a histogram of some of the events that we've recorded. So you can see a jump in sort of 2017 when we installed quite a few new instruments and expanded the network. The spike in 2012 corresponds to the Moe Thorpedale event. This doesn't actually include the Woods Point events, otherwise you'd see a similar spike there from September last year. And based on this, we have about a magnitude completeness of about a local magnitude 0.7. So based on that, it's probably one of the best performing sort of research grade continually operating networks in the country, we believe. The instruments that we use, similar to some of the other presentations, we use a lot of GULRAUP CMG 6T instruments. We have quite an ensemble of different instruments because the network sort of started in 2012, and then there's been sort of further iterations and acquisition of assets over time. So these are the typical instruments we use. We use sort of 250 samples per second. So we're getting that high frequency signals for the local earthquakes. And then in recent times, those sites further to the east along the coast there, as part of that microseismic network, we've started using some post-hole and borehole instruments just to contend with the attenuation of the seismic waves through the unconsolidated sediments, because there's no outcropping hard rock there, and also reduces noise. So these have just been dug with a hand auger that you can see there. You can get down to sort of 1 to 3 meters, just drilling that with a bit of elbow grease, and then just PVC lined poles. And we have some deeper instruments. These are also called post holes, but they actually were in professionally dug sort of 20-meter boreholes. And then we have in the Strzelecki, like back in the Strzelecki onshore hard rock area, we have a couple of 100-meter boreholes as well from a sort of extra project in 2016 through AUSCO. And then the most recent addition to our instrumentation has been 2 Brive ocean bottom seismometers, similar to what Michelle was saying. Dealing in the sort of marine environment's pretty challenging, and we've had quite a lot of challenges with the instruments. But this has sort of expanded our capability to monitor this offshore location for CarbonNet, so adding the offshore element to the network. And these were specifically custom built instruments that differ a bit from those national seismometers in that. So they're designed for shallow water, high frequency, and I think they're the first of those instruments, high frequency shallow water OBSs in the country that we know of. And it's quite a dynamic offshore environment. It's, there's a lot of different stakeholders to consider. There's oil and gas industry out there, the CCS industry, obviously, local fishermen. There's also some trawling, quite a lot of trawling that happens. And we think one of our instruments was interfered with by some trawlers, as well as being shallow water and quite affected by storm surges and wave action. As I mentioned, we keep a few instruments set aside for aftershock monitoring. So most recently, we deployed them in September last year for the Woods Point event. We managed to get up there the day following the event and have one instrument installed sort of within 36 hours of the event, which we considered a pretty good effort considering we were in lockdown and weren't meant to be travelling outside of Melbourne at the time. And there were quite a few logistical and paperwork hoops to jump through. And we worked closely with GA and SRC, who were also out there to pick the best locations for our 6 instruments and the 4 rapid deployment kits that GA sent down. And we still have 2 instruments out there. So that's one of those in the bottom right-hand corner there on top of Mount Skene, which I last visited just before winter to add a couple of extra batteries to try to get it through. And you can see there was already some snow there. Similar to SRC, we use their EQ server software package to host our data. So it's free, the waveform events are freely downloadable. There's the link there. Happy to share that with anyone who's not familiar or hasn't seen it and wants to access any of the data. And we also host the data from David Love's South Australian network. So you can see the yellow dots there from South Australia. That's all his stations that he'll talk about. Onto research for the last couple of minutes that I've got. So a lot of our work over the last sort of 5 or 6 years has focused on monitoring around this Pelican site. And we've really proud to have developed the sort of applied seismic monitoring for the carbon capture storage industry, particularly since it's this challenging offshore location where traditional approaches to monitoring, where you normally might have an array of stations at the surface or some borehole instruments directly around the injection site, because this is an offshore location, they're either not possible or extremely expensive options, particularly at this sort of pre-injection feasibility stage of the project. So we've spent a lot of time working on how we can provide the best monitoring by, a novel use of instruments such as those post holes and the boreholes, the further island shores, providing a little bit of coverage, and then the OBSs. And there hasn't been a lot of activity quite close to the Pelican site in the sort of 5 years that we've been monitoring, which is probably expected. It's not a particularly active location, as you'd expect. And you can see that most of the events are significantly deeper. Because there hasn't been lots of events, we have done a bit of work on testing the network sensitivity in the absence of events that we can record. That's kind of why I was asking Hugh about that before. So we built on the approach of Tremelli here. So it was a methodology that existed, and we worked with CSIRO to develop this into a user-friendly web app where you can sort of input your stations and then produce a sort of network modeling. So this was an analytical modeling approach. It was basically you define noise at each station. It produces some synthetic seismograms through it, assumes a homogeneous medium that they're traveling through, and then looks at the seismic signal compared to the signal to noise ratio at each station. And this is freely available online for anyone to use and test and play with. And we're quite happy for more collaboration in this space. And then my colleague Janica, who I mentioned before, also developed another approach, a bit more computationally intensive approach that sort of computes full waveforms and takes into account sort of like 1D seismic velocity and attenuation to model a similar sort of thing using a more sort of robust approach, but more computationally intensive. Takes quite a while to run. Other research, we're sort of developing our expertise in source physics. So we've done a fair bit of work on focal mechanisms through different approaches. I've also developed a workflow for 3D seismic velocity modeling, where we simultaneously use the travel time data set to invert for seismic velocity and then relocate events. And this has been successfully applied to a test data set so far. There's some very preliminary results shown on the screen there. A couple of other papers that we've published, one on the Thorpdale event in 2012 I mentioned, another on the 2016 Petermann Ranges event. So that was another one where we took some aftershock equipments out and were sort of, boots on the ground after the event. And we're always open for collaboration, whether it's in the research space or with the instruments or aftershock monitoring. I think that's about my time done. So yeah, just like to thank all our research partners, Auscope again, and ANLEC R&D, and the others listed there. And thank you very much.
Okay, next up we have David Love, who's going to be talking about the SAA and Public Seismograph Network.
It's just, I'm going to talk about the Seismological Association of Australia, which I've got the nice name of Chief Seismologist at the moment. We were incorporated in 2017 as a not-for-profit association. About the time the state government here decided to close the network, and other people on the committee with me are Blair Lade, Joe Greta, Paul Hutchinson, Peter Gray, Kevin McHugh, and Cole Lynham. So we're particularly interested in establishing and running stations. So the association and its members are currently operating about 24 stations in South Australia. Those are the black ones you can see there. We did have a couple of other stations running. They've since been removed, but that's a key part of what we're doing. But we're interested in helping other people around the country with little bits here and there. So over the last year, we've helped Albie Judge over in Perth at Martin Observatory. We've had a fair bit of contact with Lockhart School. We're now running a station with Kevin McHugh in Canberra. And we hope in a couple of weeks, Kevin will be opening a station down at Bega as well. We're also particularly interested in locating earthquakes. So for the financial year, we've got 740 events, mostly located by Alison Wallace, still a number by myself and Kevin McHugh. And most of them are still in South Australia, but of recent times where we feel we can make some improvements, we've been doing a little bit in the eastern states. We've recently started a webpage, earthquake.net.au. There's not a huge amount on it at the moment, but we hope to build it up. You can find 29 newsletters for our association. Also a link to our database and a simple data download page. For our database, here's a sample shot. You can browse around and zoom in, pick on events, and for an event there's general data, there's phases, as you can see here, to see what stations were used in the location. Can also see the magnitudes, currently still only using Richter magnitudes. You can see the text output, as most of you will be familiar with, and you can also download our files, seismogram file with our pics, text output, and the equilocal binary output. Back in March, we did a rapid deployment of 3 portables after a widely felt earthquake here at Mount Barker. It was widely felt right over the Adelaide metro area. We got these extra stations in within a few hours, and eventually ended up getting about 14 aftershocks and a couple of focal mechanisms. At the time the earthquake occurred, these were the stations running. 2 of GA stations, one of the seismometers in schools, which we find particularly helpful. And all the other ones were SAA or its members. Also back in October last year, we dashed out following magnitude 5 earthquake here, put out 3 portables on the day, and Gary from Melbourne Uni, I think that was his Melbourne Uni, had put in another one over here in the middle of COVID. So we managed to get about 38 accurately located aftershocks, location and depth. And I'll be reporting on both of those at AWES this year, I expect. Following both of these, we had a bit of media coverage, and occasionally we do have some reports in the newspaper. As well as that, over the last year, we've had 6 member Zoom sessions discussing these quakes, anything else of interest, equipment things, variety. And we're grateful to the University of Melbourne for the use of their server to collect most of our station data. Also to the Australian Centre for Geomechanics, who collect a few of our other stations as well. We've 4 times now had a booth at the Science Alive Expo in Adelaide, and this was last year's one. We have a triple drum with a jump here and data coming in from South Australia and New Zealand. 3D globe, which has been a really big hit. A quick quake demo, which my grandsons used to demonstrate to students. Vibrator table and all sorts of other equipment. Before COVID, there were about 30,000 people going through over 3 days. This time it was only about 20,000. It gets a bit chaotic. We need a fair number of volunteers. You can see here my grandson, or one of my grandsons, demonstrating a shaker table. The jump here, very popular. And the 3D globe, we had people lined up in quite large numbers. Late last year, with the help of University of Adelaide, we monitored ambient vibration at 15 points in this 12-storey building using 3 sensors. And the data is being used at the moment for an honours project by 2 students. We have access to 2 vaults, and this is the main one. We did have some voltmeters running. They're not currently running. We've got an old 20-second vertical, grew up 1 second, STS2 on loan from ANU, and the data from this is going to IRIS. Lippmann tilt meter on loan from Earth Physics and Space Science in Hungary. And Wilmore, we had a Trillium 120 there. It's now moved to another vault. We've also got a triaxial magnetometer. A lot of our members are interested in a lot of astronomical applications, and that's partly where the magnetometer came in. And this is the control area of that vault. Here's a quick photo of the other vault, which currently has Trillium and accelerometer, but room for other things. I was asked to mention the PSN stations as well. These go to the Australian Centre for Geomechanics in Perth. These are the ones that have been running for most of this year, and most but not all of these were established by Vic Dent at some stage, and particularly Arthur River. At Arthur River, There have been up to 3, these purple ones, running online. They were the first ones really close to the rupture area, which is about here. Since then, I believe GSWA have popped another one right in the middle. We really need about 4 or 5 in the middle, is my thinking. I think these have been moved a bit. The data from that is a little bit more awkward to get, but I have managed to get most of the things I've wanted from there. Also, there have been stations running on the East Coast to PSN, but only 2 this year. And unfortunately, Mike Turnbull will be moving later, so this long-running one will be closing down, not too far distant. And so that's it. You can see us on earthquake.net.au. We've currently got 29 members, but any others who are particularly interested, we could certainly do with more members. Thank you.
I'll be playing Tim's Ozscope presentation now.
Well, hello everybody. My name is Tim Rolling. I'm the CEO of Ozscope, and I'd really like to thank Adam for putting together this meeting. And I apologise for not being able to be here in person and just providing a pre-recorded version of this talk. But unfortunately, my travel plans tomorrow have just been changed at the last minute, and as a result, I'm not going to be able to dial in during the meeting, but I'm going to provide this as a bit of an update to where Ozscope's at the moment in the seismology space. And I believe that a number of members of our project teams are going to be presenting today. So hopefully you'll be able to get more detailed updates from them, and they know a lot more about the technical details than I do. So I'll take this opportunity to give you a bit of an overview of what Ozscope's doing and what's important to us at the moment. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which our research infrastructure and community operate across the Australian continent, and pay our respects to elders past and present. For me today, it's the Boon Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I recognise their connection with land, sea, sky and waterways for tens of thousands of years. So as I said, I'm going to give you an update on what Ozscope is, but some of you may not have heard of Ozscope before or may not have had much to do with this. So just for those of you, Ozscope is the national research infrastructure provider for the Earth and Geospatial Sciences. We're funded under the NCRIS program by the federal government. And we've been around since 2006 and have had geophysical programs that entire time and have had a provided continuous support for passive seismic and magnetotellurics projects primarily during that period. But we invest in a lot more than that. So Ozscope, as I said, our vision is to help enable a sustainable and resilient nation through providing predictive geoscience, or through enabling predictive geoscience. And our mission is to build an integrated and collaborative research platform that services and facilitates theoretical and applied geoscientific research. So to that end, as I said, we invest in geophysics. So we have passive seismic and magnetotellurics programs, but increasingly other methodologies as well. We also have geochemistry and geochronology laboratories. We invest in geodesy through the VLBI telescope arrays and through GNSS instruments and acquisition of gravity data. We have outreach programs such as seismometers in schools, which I'll mention in a moment. We have characterization facilities like the HiLogger instruments at all of the state geological surveys. And we also provide an extensive data infrastructure that provides support for managing the data collected by all of these facilities, as well as making it discoverable and fair and deliverable. And then we also have a number of simulation analysis and modelling programs that sit on top of that and add value to the data and consume it and use it to constrain various modelling methodologies. So, as I said, we've been around since 2006, but we're currently going through a new funding cycle. And many of you would be aware that over the last couple of years, the Commonwealth has been putting together this new National Research Infrastructure Roadmap, which defines the way that new investments will be made over the next 5-year period. And we've been very active in trying to influence the content of this roadmap and also the way that it's being interpreted. What they've really done is come up with a series of research themes, some enhancements, some system-wide enhancements, and some step changes that they want to implement investment in. So you can see that there are a number of hooks for the geoscience community and ways that we can engage with that. Within within the research themes and challenges, rather, there's mention of critical minerals, obviously something that's relevant to many of our work programs at the moment. Within the system-wide enhancements area, they talk about continental scale observation, again, something clearly that passive seismic falls within. And then in the step change area, they talk about environmental monitoring and world-class environmental monitoring. So there are a number of ways that we can engage with this document and use it to make compelling arguments for new investment. And that's really what AUSCOPE's job is over the next 6 months to 12 months to try to make sure that there's continued and new investment in this space over the next 5 years. Again, many of you will be aware and many of you will have been involved in the development of our 5-year investment plan and our 10-year strategy, which are 2 documents that you can get off our webpage, which pretty much describe how we want to, the vision that we have for AUSCOPE and how we will engage basically with this RIP process, which is how the new funding is allocated. So we're continuing to use that downward-looking telescope philosophy that was developed by the community and is captured in these 2 documents. And we're certainly going to focus on enhancing Earth monitoring and observation, which is clearly key to this community. All right, so I'll really quickly just run through some of our programs. And as I said, there are other people here who'll probably talk to these in more detail, but I'll briefly run through them so you know the scope of our project and maybe some of the new ones who people won't be talking about here. Our most significant project in this space is the Earth Imaging Project. There are a couple of components of this. Megan Miller manages the ANU node, which focuses primarily on passive seismic. And then Graham Heinsohn manages the Adelaide node, which focuses primarily on magnetotellurics. And so I guess I won't go through all of these details about what's going on. You can have a look at the comments in the slide. But I will, and these slides are some updates that were presented by our different projects over the last, about a month ago at our last all hands meeting. But what I will mention is that, that people are back in the field. So field work is recommencing post-COVID. So that's very exciting. We're catching up on a lot of those field programs that I guess we were a bit behind on. We're transitioning, I guess, to some new novel technologies, and we're investing in novel sensing technologies such as the DAS equipment that Megan's group has been using recently and has made some investments in, as well as the nodal seismometers. So there is some new equipment available through ANSIA. It's available for use. The other big project was the Curnamona Cube project. This is a co-located passive seismic and MT array within Curnamona region. You can see the map on the slide. And that's nearing completion. A lot of that's been collected. Also, some novel approaches. So the co-location for making it easier for getting these instruments in the field, but also providing some novel data sets where you have the co-located instruments. We're also looking at developing or deploying some long-term monitoring sites. So we're working with TERN, the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, at one of their super sites, and we're looking at having some long-term passive seismic monitoring deployed at that site. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our OBS fleet were also deployed on the Macquarie Ridge. Harobe had a mission down there. Those instruments have been returned now, most of them, and are being refurbished and ready for future use. And that's another program that we intend to continue to support going forwards. And we're looking at some wide aperture array experiments that we might support, as well as looking at more sustainable ways of supporting that fleet of instruments. We also have our Seismometers in Schools program, which is one of our primary outreach programs. Michelle Salmon and Malcolm Sambridge out of ANU run that project with support from a number of other organisations. And this puts research quality seismometers in a bunch of secondary schools and primary schools around the country, and really engages an enormous number of students in seismology and science. It's a really important project of ours. And they also do events like the Footy Quake that they hold during National Science Week at the Canberra football stadium each year, and try to get people to generate footquakes at the footy. We also have a subsurface observatory project, which is based out of the University of Melbourne. Dave Belton, Abe and Januka run that project. And this is really our aftershock seismometry fleet, and we've had a number of earthquakes in Victoria over the last 12 months. The large Woods Point earthquake about a year ago, and then a number along the coast more recently. And the team's been really active in monitoring those. And also have been doing a number of outreach activities as well, which we're really excited about. So thank you for those efforts. Just very briefly before I finish, a couple of the sort of new projects as well. We're supporting a project at University of Western Australia in collaboration with Adelaide, as well as the Terrestrial Ecosystem Research Network, to develop a number of critical zone observatories. And these are the sort of long-term monitoring sites of the critical zone. And we've invested in some nodal seismometer technologies for that community to help do some of their site mapping, and particularly the depth to bedrock and water table analysis. So that's a new engagement for us. We also have a new project called GRIT, which is the Geophysical Research Infrastructure for Antarctica. This is Kate Solway, Anya Redding and Matt King. Pictures of Kate deploying some of the MT equipment in Greenland to test it. But this is a project that will provide both MT and passive seismic and some geodesy equipment as well for deployment in Antarctica over the next few years. And again, a project we're very excited about. And finally, I also wanted to mention our mobile petrophysics laboratory. This is a multi-scanner core logger that we've had at Melbourne Uni for a while, but we've containerized with partners at CSIRO. And this is now available to be moved around the various core yards around the country, particularly at the State Geological Surveys. But it allows for characterization of rock properties from drill core. And obviously that's relevant to this community, particularly because you can measure P-wave velocity as well as natural gamma, gamma density, electrical resistivity, magnetic susceptibility, and various other characteristics of these rocks. And we're hoping to build up a much more sophisticated database of these rock properties, which is obviously relevant to a lot of the work that you all do. So that's where I'll leave it. I'm sorry again that I couldn't be with you today, but hopefully this has given you a sense of what we're up to and a flavour. And I would welcome any questions. Please contact me, give me a call, shoot me an email, or follow up with some of the details with other members of our team who I believe will be in the meeting today. Thanks for your time, and sorry I couldn't be with you.
Okay, so that was Tim's presentation. I think that was really great to fill in some gaps I certainly didn't know about as well, some of that later stuff. So next up, we have Huayu from Western Australia. So if you want to kick off, I'll leave it to you.
Thanks, Adam, and thank you all for coming. I'm Huayu Yuan, still officially with Macquarie, but I'm joining GSWA shortly. So I'm actually representing a group of folks here in Western Australia. You can see the names here, and also the teams, the installation teams. So basically, we are. Can I move this? Is it moving?
Yeah.
Okay,
It's
cool.
a bit small, but we can see it.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, so this group here, the main focus here is to target the lithosphere of the so-called West Australian craton. And well, I guess our interest here is its old Precambrian lithosphere architecture. And we assume, okay, these old lithosphere must have, these so-called fossil deformations, which we treat them as geological archive. So we can look into the past tectonism, and we can use a lot of techniques. But here, mostly for us, we're using the earthquake seismic imaging. In terms of what we have been doing, so mostly two things. First is all about digging holes, 300-400 temporary arrays so far. And that the second one is modeling by using passive source seismology. So this is a bit status report for the passive source coverage called WA. So this is before 2013, before we decided to do something big. So gray dots are the ANU station, temporary stations deployed since maybe 93. And black dots these are actually most of the current permanent sites maintained by GA. And then this is up to 2020. We have done several major large deployments in collaboration with ANU and NCA and some of the folks in the audience. So this is actually what we expect to see in 10 years' time. We call this W array. So I'll have some more slides about this, but I'm just gonna quickly go into these existing data sets or deployment so far. So we have, well, GA has been doing permanent stations here long enough. And also the school programs, some other speakers have mentioned. Skippy, that's the first one, started in 93, but unfortunately there's only maybe 4 or 5 stations in WA when the program stopped. And then there came, I think, 2 of them, and also ANU had W Cratons, I think 2 of them, and also in recent Albany Fraser network. And then we started in 2014 by calling this one COPA Capricorn orogenic passive array. And we also included a high density array in it. It's called HPS. And then after that, you started this spiral array in the Southern Cross. Later on, we worked together with UWA, Macquarie, and GSWA in this Perth Basin project, which targets the Perth Basin. And ANU has this Kimberley array up there in the Kimberley region. And then with UWA, we have this EGF high density network. It's a 5 kilometer spacing network to target the shallow crust of the Yukon Craton. And then in 2017, we established some collaboration with the Institute of Geology and Geophysics, Chinese Academy of Sciences. So far, we have been doing like 3. We have 3 major deployments. Campus, that's an OBS1, and CWAS, that's 2 phases of land deployments. And now we have the Pilbara array going on at the moment. And Michelle mentioned the SWAN network, which is still going. So I guess the main thing for us is just to focus the lithosphere here, and I'll just quickly show some 3 major past deployments, because these ones have the density, and also we how do I put this? We tried similar seismic imaging techniques, which will be used in this coming up WRA program. So the first one is the Capricorn array, which is over 80 stations for 3 years. It's quite a long drive. But anyway, we focused on the 2 continental collisions in the area. And with all the stations, we were able to do reserve functions, ambient noise, tomography, well, just the quite drastic changes across the origin. And then this is actually ANU's Albany Fraser deployment. The thing is, okay, this is the southeastern corner of the Yukon, and I guess the local geologists here proposed, okay, this is a passive margin, and then it eventually evolved into the current oceanic arc setup. And then ANU had the Fraser array there. And here, GSW, I think, or GA also had 2 active source lines. So these provided very nice images of the crust structure. Basically here on the right, the top one is the kind of like integrate model for the crust from both active source, gravity inversion, and passive source. The bottom 3 here are the receiver function stacking image from Christian. And we did the ambient noise for this one. So I guess I'll just quickly show, okay, for these craton margins, we all see these sort of moho buckling, as you can see following the mouse, where the mid to lower crust especially always has the fast velocities. And then the other one is the Canyon project. We interested in here because, well, because of the thick basin, Canyon Basin, we just didn't know how the collision between the north and west cratons, where it occurred. And so we put up this 900 kilometer line, which is composed of 60 broadband stations for like over 2 years. This is in collaboration with the Chinese Institute. And then we developed the reserve function and then the noise tomography model. And we combined our new models with the existing ones like active source and body wave. This is SN model in the middle, and the original surface fluid tomography model to infer, okay, we have 2 major structures. One is, this is obviously the joint between the 2 cratons. And then we also find something which is hidden in the West Australian side of the thick lithosphere. And then, you know, we proposed some, you know, stories like a hidden origins in the West Australian craton. So the big thing for us right now is to push out the so-called WRA project. This is the state-funded project, which will include 1,600 broadband stations. Well, these will be like these dots all across WA in 10 years' time. Each site will be deployed for a year. Let me see. Okay, so this is what for the first phase. I forgot to mention, so we'll be doing the first deployment here because the state is just too large for us to do it all, and 1,600 1,600 stations are just expensive to buy. So we decided to use 160 stations instead. And then we'll start in 10 days time in this region. And then after a year, we'll be like moving regions, rolling over to different regions in 10 years time. So the stations are all broadband. We're able to buy some, mostly GSW is able to buy some, and we also are on instrument loan from the Chinese Institute. We kind of designed some sort of a passive source imaging tasks. The main thing here is these are like sort of targeting the multiple scale lithospheric architecture of WA. These are just, okay, this is to show why we have to do 40 kilometer spacing instead of 50 or less. Or basically we want a continuous mole to target the whole WA crust. And then here's a quick example to show what we are expecting to have. So this is using the Capricorn array data as an example. So basically down here, these are regional and even global scale models of the Northern WA lithosphere. I guess this is the global, and the PNSN, and this is the surface wave model from ANU. It's all smooth, but if we use 40 kilometer spacing, and we should be able to see something like this. And here, this is a body weight tomography model at 150 kilometer depth. You can see sort of clear Pilbara craton, the edge of the Yukon craton, and the Capricorn origin in the center. So I guess this is the last one. I need to also mention I guess this is probably Michelle showed this as well. This is actually some of the semi-permanent stations GSWA deployed, and we're also doing some sort of rapid response deployment in the Arthur River region, like the smart solar seismometers. Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roy. Yeah, it's really interesting to see. I can't wait to see the results from that hugely dense 40 kilometer space network. That's going to be a really interesting data set. So thank you very much for the presentation.
Thanks.
Okay. Next we have Anya reading from Tasmania.
Thank you very much, Adam. Good afternoon, everybody. And so I'd like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the lands of the Palawa people of Tasmania, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I'd like to speak this afternoon on the University of Tasmania and Antarctic programs. Actually, this is quite heavily biased to the Antarctic side of things. And I was very pleased to see that Alexander will be speaking shortly with respect to the some of the IMS activity, including Tasmania. So I like to start any kind of talk involving Tasmania and Antarctica and seismology with this graphic, just because it shows really how biased to the Northern Hemisphere our global instrumentation is. You can see the red GSN stations and the yellow diamonds there for the seismic arrays. So any little red dot in the Southern Hemisphere is really worth its weight in gold. And of course, we have a nearby GSN station, TAU, one of the longest running GSN stations. Yeah, that's been looked after for a long time by Michael Roach. So these are key locations for kind of global recording because of the sparse Southern Hemisphere coverage. in Tasmania at UTAS, we are slowly but surely contributing to the AusSIS effort. There are 4 AusSIS stations currently in Tasmania, and we do have instruments that were purchased with some leftover grant money to install at other schools stations, notably Flinders Island and King Island. And we're exploring a potential partnership with the Young Tassie Scientist Initiative so that there are just really talented and enthusiastic people to contribute to that outreach component. In Tim Rawlings' presentation, Tim mentioned the GRIT initiative. So this is geophysical research infrastructure for Antarctica. That includes seismic instruments, magnetotelluric instruments, and GPS instruments, a sort of confluence of various funding sources. And the idea behind the GRIT project, or the GRIT facility, is that these are specialized Antarctic instruments, so they generally cost a bit more because of the polar rated electronics. And the idea is that they're based in Antarctica, so we don't lose months shipping instruments backwards and forwards. And they're kind of packaged to be fairly field ready and fairly easily deployable, including by, well, I'll say non-specialists, but yeah, just so that we can draw on available people to help with the Antarctic logistic flexibility. The motivation behind GRIT is a little unusual in comparison to tectonic projects. There's an urgent need to understand and predict Antarctic ice loss, and we want to understand Earth-ice interactions beneath those great ice sheets. And in terms of understanding tectonic structure, which of course is dear to many of our hearts, we have this interesting problem of understanding what we called cryptic terrains. So those are terrains which have actually no outcrop at all. We believe we can sort of detect the edges of those cryptic terrains, but yeah, it's a little bit more of a difficult job. And of course, Australia has claims and bases, territorial claims and bases in East Antarctica, and therefore there's a responsibility to contribute to that science. So the motivation there is to to inform how the solid Earth responds to glaciation and deglaciation in the form of glacial isostatic adjustment. As in the previous slide, we can make use of satellite gravity data to point to locations of likely ice mass change. But we need geophysical data to measure the Earth uplift. That's where the GPS instruments come in, and mantle viscosity. And yeah, you can see this graphic here indicating the various kind of influences on the great ice sheets. And really there's a lot of influences from geothermal heat flow and subglacial volcanism, as well as the isostatic uplift. So there's many different sort of angles on that project. Mantle viscosity, its emerging can be best constrained with a combination of seismic and MT data. There's some nice recent work that was supervised by Kate Selway, paper by Ramirez et al. But as you can see from the figure on the left here, there's some very big open areas with very limited seismic data constraints at this point in time. Moving to a more shallow realm, we would like to know about the ice bedrock interface. Basal melting is a major control on ice sheet and glacier stability. And again, magnetotellurics and seismic methods can be used together to inform our knowledge of that key ice bedrock interface zone, and in particular whether there's sort of free water or saturated sediments or frozen sediments, all of which will have an influence on how the ice sheet responds. Okay, so just an overview of the instrument facility that's growing. So around 4 plus 4 magnetotelluric instrument sets. You can see on the right here a trial deployment in Greenland, which I understand was very successful. So it's terrific seeing those instruments actually in the snow. Around 10 GPS instruments, and we're looking at around, at the moment, 15 plus 6 seismic instruments of different sorts, and those were funded by an ARC LEAF grant to myself. And these are contributing to projects including a big sort of Tasmanian-centred effort known as ACES, Excellence in Antarctic Sciences, and Matt King's the director there, and I'm the co-lead of one of the programs, and Kate Selway is also involved. So in terms of Antarctic field work, we had a sort of somewhat curtailed season last year, and I'm actually planning to go to Antarctica in a couple of weeks' time, and there's another season we hope for next year. So just a bit of a flavour of getting the instruments together. These are kind of mobilisation and field deployment management was carried out by Tobias Stahl, who works with me at UTAS. A very sort of highly specified hardware for Antarctic use, also kind of workable with gloves in most cases, because we don't really want to take our gloves off at -20. Some very sort of slim solar panels so that they don't give much windage, and yeah, so these are all either in Antarctica or being shipped to Antarctica right now. One of our modes of operation is sort of passive seismic, ambient seismic data collecting efforts. So the idea is to have sort of multiple small clusters of arrays, and they kind of roll by in sort of roughly 2-week deployments, covering various locations, perhaps using MMSPAC and that kind of microtremor type techniques. This is an example of the winter array station being installed. So these are much longer duration recordings, and you can see here those sort of solar panel towers and the instrument being deployed. And this is deployed in a sort of post-hole mode, so it's relatively easy to drill down into the deeper layers of firn below the softer snow. So these stations are currently installed. This is the winter spiral in collaboration with Hrvoje Tkalčić at NU, and you can see there's a few instruments missing, but we hope to get those in this season and record over the next winter at least. Just to finish up then, we have a preceding and current deployment making use of ANSIA instruments. I'm sure Michelle Salmon will be heartily pleased to learn that we're replacing the ANSIA instruments with Nanometrics, probably post-hole SLIM or Horizon instruments, depending whether we have a ice or rock installation. And with any luck, we'll return our long overdue ANSIA loan before too long. So yeah, to wrap up then, definitely a work in progress here. Interested in deep earth rheology, ice bedrock interface knowledge, as well as tectonic structure. And I'd just like to make a plug for, in the age of machine learning, myself and colleagues are running quite a lot of multivariate studies that make use of things like 3D seismic tomography. And seismic data has incredible value as an integrated data set. So we have a very, very strong reason to collect seismic data. It's fantastic to see that GSWA work with that very detailed seismic data. That'll be wonderful. Give a wonderful resource for multivariate and machine learning type studies, as well as the seismic structure up front. And there's always further uses for seismic data. Some of the Antarctic data have already been used in looking at ocean wave climate studies. So there's always multiple applications. I'll stop there, and you're warmly invited to follow progress on social media, either our group's Twitter feed or myself, or by all means discuss by email if there's not time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Anya. That was great. I'm really struggling not to say how cool what you're doing is because of the climate, but it is extremely cool what you're doing. And from the cold of Antarctica, we're going to go up to sunny Queensland with Dion, who's going to sort of fill us in on what's happened in Queensland in the past and potentially in the future. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Adam. Is that coming up okay?
Yep, could see that.
All right, I just threw a couple of pretty pictures together, but a fairly informal update on what's been happening around UQ and Queensland more generally. I guess first thing is, yes, Queensland has earthquakes too. We've got a historical record going back to 1866 that looks something like this on MapView. 1918 magnitude 6 Gladstone earthquake is probably the most significant earthquake, still of concern for emergency services to this day, because a repeat of that one has the potential to have a major disruption to infrastructure, with Gladstone being a major port and refinery area and a lot of transport infrastructure associated with that. About a third of Queensland's economy is propped up by Gladstone. So that's probably the main motivator to continue to study seismicity in Queensland. We have had quite a number of magnitude 5 and larger earthquakes, some relatively recently in the last few years. However, it's worth noting that the historical seismicity in Queensland very much tracks with historical seismic monitoring in Queensland. So you've got a total number of earthquakes cumulative in this top graph per year or over the years. And in the bottom graph, the number of installed seismographs. And as you can see, the increasing rate in seismicity largely reflects the increasing number of seismographs installed. Historical context there, around 1934-35, the first seismograph was installed in Queensland, and largely in response to the 1918 earthquake and a few others. And W.H. Bryan at the University of Queensland installed a seismograph, actually 3, I think, seismographs at then UQ's Gardens Point campus in Brisbane CBD. They were later moved to St Lucia when UQ relocated from the CBD. And in around the 1950s, we also installed the Charters Towers and Mount Nebo WWSN stations, Worldwide Seismograph Network stations. Charters Towers remains part of the Global Seismic Network. Mount Nebo became known as BRS and has been operating almost continuously until a couple of years ago, when someone in their wisdom changed the GPS datum, and our recording equipment was no longer able to receive GPS signals. Fortunately for Mount Nebo, Geoscience Australia has come to the rescue, and hopefully before the end of this year, but certainly early next year, Brisbane should be up and running again as Brisbane's hard rock reference station as part of the urban monitoring program of Geoscience Australia. So we'll be very pleased to see BRS up and running again. As far as UQ's involvement, we have a lease for that site that's been running since the 1950s. And so we're working collaboratively with GA to convert that one over. We've had various networks over the years. So through in the 1980s here, there was a lot of interest in monitoring for reservoir-induced seismicity. So a number of SEQ water and sun water stations were installed to monitor water reservoirs, mostly along the east coast of Queensland. Through into 1994, so a lot of these were operated through Geological Survey of Queensland. That contract was then passed to the University of Queensland, where we were operating some 30 plus seismographs in the state at that time. There was a little bit of a drop that came around 2002 when the state government took a couple of years to figure out whether they wanted to keep monitoring regional seismicity. They agreed, and SRC took over the running of that network, and were able to install some additional seismographs during that period. And then around 2010, as shown here, we basically, the state government decided that regional seismic monitoring was not their responsibility, much like what happened in South Australia, unfortunately. And as you can see from the earthquake magnitude plot down below here, that's had a massive impact upon our detection level across the whole state. For what it's worth, that's what the recurrence interval statistics looks like. So magnitude completeness around the state is probably around 3 to 3.5. Yeah, we don't have a really great estimate of B value across the whole state from the catalogue that I have, albeit that's probably not as complete as it could be for the last few years. That's about all in terms of the pretty pictures. In terms of UQ's current focus in the seismology space, we're essentially unfunded, so I do everything voluntarily, but I have a good relationship with Queensland Fire and Emergency Services, and I'm the registered subject matter expert on earthquakes with the State Disaster Coordination Centre as well. I've done a lot of work with QFES in the last few years on improving their earthquake preparedness and risk assessment activities. That's continuing to this day, and it's nice to have Jane Sexton up here at QFES running that operation, because she certainly knows what she's talking about in that space. Public outreach, I'll talk to anyone who'll listen about earthquakes in Queensland. But my main regular activity in that respect is to run a 2-hour lecture and two 2-hour practical sessions each year with second year QUT earth and environmental science students, where I teach them about earthquakes generally. And then we run a couple of workshops, practical exercises, where we ask them to think about how would you prepare for an earthquake if you had 10-year warning that an earthquake of a particular magnitude is likely to occur, and think about the roles of different stakeholders like government, emergency services, health, infrastructure, the business sector and that sort of thing. And then ask them to also go through an exercise of thinking about how would response and recovery look on a first hour, first day, first week, first month, first 6 months, first year kind of basis. That's an exercise that the students really seem to enjoy. It gives them a really good appreciation of natural hazard preparedness, but also response and recovery, and the potential impacts beyond just the direct effects of the earthquakes, but the societal and social impacts that come with it. And I just wanted to finish, Adam, if I may, with just a recognition of Cole Lynham and Mike Turnbull, who have really been working very hard for a long time to ensure that the historical, mostly paper-based seismic records and data that we've collected here in Queensland are being preserved. In particular, the Royal Society of Queensland has just agreed to maintain a digital copy of a lot of Mike's earthquake reports and information, thanks to Cole's involvement with the Royal Society. We're in contact with the Queensland State Library as well. Actually, I might just show you this other thing. I'm hopeful that with this activity through Mike and Cole, that we can get a better recognition of the value of the kinds of data that we've got lying around here in Queensland. This is just a couple of excerpts from one of the folders that the late Jack Rinn put together for past historical earthquakes. So it contains a lot of information. I'm just showing you bits and pieces. So these are old newspaper articles. We've got correspondence of people with felt reports. And also in those folders, we have copies of the seismograms for those earthquakes from various stations as well. There's about 20 of those. I'm looking to try and find some funding so that we can get somebody who can scan more of these folders. I've only got about 4 of them scanned so far out of the 20. And I'm hoping that eventually that will make its way to the State Library of Queensland and be openly accessible for future generations, so that this valuable work in Queensland over so many decades is not lost to history. That's probably enough from me, Adam.
Thank you, Leon. Yeah, I agree that historical data is really important to keep hold of. It's really easy to let it slide and disappear. So I'm glad there are people actively looking to preserve that.
Yeah.
Okay, so our second to last presenter is Alexander from Tasmania. So he's going to talk about the activities of IMS.
So I represent the Institute of Mine Seismology. I'm the chairman of head of research of that institute. We are in Tasmania, our Australian office, which is like 6 people. South Africa's got 46, 7, 8 people. Offices there, and one in Canada, which we're growing now from 7 to 10 with the next few months. So as the name of the institute is private. It's owned by employees, so 100%. So every single employee can have a shares in the company. As the name of the company indicates, we do instrument and monitor mine seismic response to mining. So 95, probably 97% of our income or activity is mines, and there are some others like nuclear waste disposal, the repository in Finland, or some few water reservoirs and dams and structures and some fracking here and there, but that's mine, but that's probably 2% or 3% of the revenue. We do mining. We've got kind of, out of that almost 90 plus, 95 employees, 22 PhDs and 4 PhD candidates. The rest is degree people, which are mainly physics, math, computer science. There's 1 or 2 earth sciences people, 1 structural geologist, or 2 actually structural geologists. So we do business in 37 countries. So people frequently ask me, why are you sitting in Tasmania? It's not a mining country. There is a mining in Tasmania, but it's, we used to be in Western Australia, but we moved to Tasmania because if you do business in 37 countries, wherever you are in the wrong place. So you may be as well where you like. Our young people wanted Tasmania for obvious reasons. It's beautiful, and I remember when we moved here in 2011, 11, the housing was cheap, and that was very important for youngsters. They couldn't afford anything in Perth. So, and then now they got used to it, they're very happy. So that's fine. We monitor probably over 300 or 400 mines. And just to give you this kind of scale of operation, we record and process. We're processing on average between 40 and 60,000 seismic events every single day. Okay, and that comes from the mines, which so the biggest mine will have 220 3-component seismic stations. The smallest will have maybe 5, 6, or 10 stations. Most of them are 3 components. So if you take that 50,000 on average, or 60 kind of thousand events multiplied by 3 components and so many sites, so you will see how many kind of millions of seismograms to process. And every single event is located, it's got its potency calculated, or seismic moment, if you like. You can always multiply potency by something you don't know. You can call it seismic moment. And then energy, obviously, and potency tensor or moment tensor. And that moment tensor is only done for the events which is possible. Sometimes data is corrupted, or it's bad, or you cannot do it. So probably per day we do a few thousand moment tensor, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 per day. And then of course one must kind of put it together and issue reports and the rest of it, which I will be talking about. We do or sell because we need to pay salaries for these people, and we don't have any support from any government, not in Australia, not in South Africa, nothing in Canada. So we need to earn that money to pay people so they can come to work every day with a smile on their face. So we only sell what we got 100% of intellectual control of. So we do our own sensors boards, we assemble them, we buy elements, but the rest is done in-house with MEMS inside, tilt meters inside, all sort of fancy boats for different applications. We developed the project started in 1985 and 1988. We developed first digital seismic system, intelligent, and now there are generations of it. So we're selling systems as well, and of course then the software and services. Today most of it is service. So selling software is not our game, because the clients don't have a time even to use that software that you want to give them. So to us, software is a service. What we kind of do is, of course, it's all safety in mines related. And as you can imagine, different mines have a different standard. The country's got a different standard. Life is priced differently in different countries. So we're trying to kind of introduce one standard for everybody. For example, in Africa, we monitor South Africa. We've got 100% market in Africa. To South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Zambia, Congo, Republic of Congo, and other people do go to Congo to underground mines. And when you look at pictures of the Congo and mines, you look something different. You look at children and something else. But there are some normal, decent mines run by multinationals with certain standard. And we got Tanzania and Mali and Ghana. And we do Peru and Chile, and so and of course Europe, Finland, Sweden, kind of you name it. So that's eventually the service which we provide is daily report for the mines, what happened over the last 24 hours, weekly, monthly, yearly, and that will be the routine stuff. Then we do seismic hazards, which is kind of done maybe once, twice a year for every single mine, and mine is a lot, so that's an ongoing record. Seismic hazard being size distribution hazard and eventually ground motion hazard. And then we do specialized services like kinematic modeling, in other words, modeling the full wave fields that goes from the seismic source into the environment, and having synthetics in every single place, full wave fields. We're trying to evaluate what kind of possible ground motion would be at different strategic locations in the mine, so they can protect themselves, improve support, so the mining will be safe. We're trying, but that's research, kinematic, dynamic modeling, which you got spontaneous ruptures over seismic sources, which are of finite thickness. As you know, we all dealt with dealing with DC kind of model of seismic source, which is mathematical representation of planes, okay, which is pure mathematical because it's plane doesn't have a thickness, doesn't exist. The first moment you introduce seismic event with a thickness, while there are complications, including rotations and all sort of things, which we need to recognize, because the hazard which we're dealing with is a near field. It is the first 200-300 meters from the sources where drama is happening. Sometimes maybe 500 meters in a large events, but normally it's few hundred meters from the source. So that's a bit different attitude we need to take. We do numerical modeling, which we develop our own, being boundary element and material point. Why material point and not finite element? Because material point allows for finite large deformation, which we record in the mine. And then the art is, and that's a project which we research project we run for the last 15 years, and we probably run it forever, trying to integrate the seismic data we record with numerical model, which we do. It's not trivial, and we successfully failing to making progress every single year. But nevertheless, we're trying. And then recently we've done some work in ambient noise. Today we got 4 PhD guys sitting on ambient noise, and we're doing exploration, let's say to 1500 meters, shallow exploration. And a research project for this year is trying to use it inside the mine for rock mass characterization, to have access to rock mass properties in different places, because that's what you need for the domain-based numerical model to constrain it. So that's probably all. I've tried to be short and sweet. If you've got any questions, I will gladly elaborate. Thanks.
We've got Erdinch from CSIRO, so he's going to fill us in on some activities down there, and then we'll finish up with a few questions after that. All right, over to you, Erdinch.
Thank you. I'm just trying to share my screen, which is an interesting exercise. Okay, can you see now?
Yep.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah, we've got your whole screen, so
yeah.
Go for it.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction, Adam. My name is Erdinç Saygın. I'm from CSIRO, Deep Earth Imaging Future Science Platform. Today I will be talking about, I need to make this small so everyone can see it, I guess. The activities, typical activities that we do at CSIRO, particularly at Deep Earth Imaging FSP. So we were established like 5 years ago. All of the team is based in Perth, Western Australia. Currently, we are 4 people with 2 visiting affiliates. Now they previous members. They've now took up positions in China in academia. Our applications is actually quite various, because we are a future science platform. We have the freedom to experiment in both blue sky research and also applied research. Because of that, we've been developing techniques for passive seismic from mine to whole continent scale. We are pretty active in FWI and also particularly in 4D seismic imaging with application to carbon capture and sequestration monitoring, and also upcoming hydrogen type projects. Recently, we're working in seismic hazards, particularly in induced seismicity, and also exploring the physics-based ground motion modeling, especially using our expertise in FWI. Our experience, so many publications have been done in the last 5 years, and also facilities. We have our own dedicated smart solar node pool with 400 sensors, all 3 components. We also have access to 2 fiber optic interrogators, 2 DAS, DSS, and DTS, including high performance computing and dedicated workstations. So it's a pretty, generous environment that we are currently in. So one of the examples, I just highlight some of the examples in the last 5 years. As I said, we are active in passive seismic imaging. One of the common things in passive seismic imaging or ambient noise seismology, there is a requirement to have the sensors working at the same time. In 2020, we demonstrated that it is possible to relax this environment by looking at the other stations, and with that you can actually extract the Green's functions or the response of the Earth between station pairs that were not working at the same time. So why is this important? As previous presenters show that Australia is quite, this is actually a map which is slightly outdated, but it has been covered and it's quite irregular. Many of these temporary arrays were not operating at the same time, but with this technique now we can use them and create a high resolution continent scale seismic noise imaging. Actually, the maps on the right hand side showing the images from all the way from 1 kilometer to the lower crust. These are shear wave velocities. So conventional methods could not tie them, and that's one of the actually interesting outputs. This work is currently in review, and I have to say that OSPAS, many of this data is actually retrieved from the OSPAS. So without that investment, we couldn't do this work. We are also, again, in passive seismic, we are trying to go to one step further by just not looking at the traditional way of processing this data and imaging the subsurface. We also developed a new imaging technique called wave equation inversion, applied to ocean bottom nodes from Northwest Australia, and directly inverting these Sholti waves. With this technique, you can get really high resolution images, both resistant to starting model irregularities, but also getting the most out of these kind of measurements. Now, this is a brilliant data set. We also we created the whole 3D structure beneath this array, a dense array. Last year, we did a targeted survey in a mine site with ambient noise using this wave equation inversion. We put around a bit less than 300 nodes, run for 1 month, and get very good signals. And we inverted this with this new wave equation inversion to create the mineralization domain. Unfortunately, I can't show too much in detail because of the confidentiality, but I can say we can image structures much better than the conventional technique. Also, we are, again, this is passive seismic, but it's actually in the imaging side and in the monitoring side of things. We recently showed that we can do direct imaging changes that is happening for various physical reasons using this previously the data set I mentioned, the offshore bottom node data set, which they show some cyclic changes within 1 hour, and we actually directly image that structure beneath that. We don't know exactly why it's happening, but we can do that. Why is this important? Because we are particularly interested in cost-effective techniques in carbon capture and sequestration, and also hydrogen monitoring. We are hoping to apply this new technique in that domain. That's just showing that. Also in the active source, so actually Pango from my team recently published a paper at Nature Geoscience using mid-ocean active source data, an active source data collected in the mid-ocean reach, applied a neat version of the full waveform inversion and compared with standard tomographic inversions. He actually managed to image this mid-ocean layering, the presence of layering in the young layer ocean crust. We are also, as I said, we have access to our multiple interrogators. Since 2021, we've been recording, we're actually using our own fiber from Kensington, Perth, traversing all the way to the city. We're using this, we are releasing this cable more than a year continuously to just simply to test the technology. For the beginning, we are looking at noise correlations to image near surface structures. And also on top of that, we actually record these Bajan earthquakes from coming from southeast of the cable with quite high fidelity. These are showing different panels with different magnitudes. Last but not least, with all these inputs that with all these outputs I mentioned previously, we have our dedicated site in Harvey, which is just south of Perth. We are getting ready to inject a controlled water injection with up to 10 tons to simulate the CO2 injection. It's a heavily instrumented region with a site with nodes, DAS cables, DTS, and DSS, and we will be throwing all these techniques that I mentioned to you to dynamically capture the changes of the subsurface. I'd like to thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Erdinç. That was very interesting. I don't want to keep everyone too much longer. Thank you for taking a couple of hours to participate, and particularly to the presenters. to contributing today. I think it's been really educational for me and hopefully for everyone else to hear what's going on, and potentially we can continue this conversation in future webinars, maybe establishing some specific workshops on particular topics that people are interested in. So again, thank you everyone for attending. Talk to you again soon.